Maybe since he was 7 years old. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, I remember he won a GP when he was like 15 or something, and that is impressive. But there was a level up that happened. I don't know exactly when this happened, but it was, call it 6-7 years ago, right? Leading up into his, ultimately his win at the 2015 World Championship. And he's never looked back ever.
The biggest thing for Seth is he took a step away from the game for a little while for college, which a lot of players do. And when he came back, it took him a little while to kind of hit that on-ramp. But since he's hit it, he's, the pedals to the floor, man. You mentioned the Grand Prix that he won very early in his career, 2007 at Daytona Beach. I was actually there, played him in the side draft, and, I lost him, and I was like, okay, I know this kid is pretty good from Maryland, but I didn't see him winning that Grand Prix and everything else that came after it. So kudos to him, and we get the opportunity to watch him. And as you mentioned, relative newcomer, and David Steinberg, not new to card games, a little bit newer to the higher echelons of Magic, but he is representing himself extremely well, getting ready to play in the lower round 2 against one of Magic's very best.
Yeah, even for the people like you, I, and some of our experts and stuff here on the weekend have all been going, hey, this guy can play. This is not, this is not one of those things where somebody just like took a weird deck and kind of got there or just ran really hot. It's kind of like, I've been really impressed by David, and, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I kind of expect to see David around. Seriously, just really impressed by David's play. And we'll see. This is another huge test for him, because going up against Seth Manfield, that is S tier, right? Like that is your, there's a group of players who you can basically interchange them. Sure, it's fun to argue about who's better than who within the group, but I don't care. If you're facing down one of those level of players, you are going to be given all you can handle. And Seth Manfield is absolutely in that class of players. So let's get underway here. We see David Steinberg kick things off with a Cauldron Familiar into Trail of Crumbs. The nice little 1-2 punch there. He is playing a little bit different of a list than some of the Collected Company ones that we've seen here in the top 8. And of course, a bunch in the Swiss. He is running Trail of Crumbs, not Collected Company. Now, on the bottom part of your screen, Seth just took a well-tuned version of really the most popular deck in the format, at least leading in, which was Sultai Midrange, and he's done amazingly with it.
Yeah, and he's made some changes. He definitely tailored his deck to beat the Goblins matchup. That was very much in mind with the main deck copies of Aether Gust, access to Disdainful Stroke, and of course Essence Scatter as well. But if you think about the core cards of this deck, you think Growth Spiral, you think Uro, you think Hydroid Krasis, you think Nissa, and with the addition of Thoughtseize from Amonkhet Remastered, this deck got definitely an injection of a power into it with that discard spell. So Seth's hand right now, it is kind of stumbling and fumbling around a little bit. Obviously, you'd like to draw some lands to be able to deploy a large Hydroid Krasis or play multiple spells in one turn. But he's not underneath that much pressure. It's just a Cauldron Familiar right now, and then Trail of Crumbs probably trying to do its thing. David deciding what he wants to do here on the third turn of the game. Does he want to go to a second Trail of Crumbs or perhaps deploy a Woe Strider?
We see 2 copies of Aether Gust in hand for Seth Manfield. And, that to me, remember, this is game number 1 here, and he's got 2 copies already in hand. He took a very real shot and said, I know what's going on in this format, and I know the cards that I need to care about, and I'm going to play Aether Gust in the main. How important is that going to be for Seth in this matchup?
Well, I'll say there's some upside to it, because you're playing against a version that, no, it doesn't have Collected Company, but it does have multiple copies of Corvold main deck. So it's going to be somewhat difficult for Steinberg to be comfortable moving all the way in, or just, a 5-mana threat against a card like Aether Gust is not ideal. So that's where it can definitely play a role. Now, the creatures that are on the battlefield right now for Steinberg in Woe Strider and Cauldron Familiar, well, Aether Gust looks a lot worse then. But it does, it's kind of this high upside, not the best of floors, but not terrible either kind of card in the matchup. I wouldn't be surprised in sideboarding if we saw Seth get away from a copy or 2, but I don't know if he wants to get away from all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he is certainly facing a deck. Take a look at the cards in hand here for Steinberg. Hey, there's a red one, there's a green one. Lots of options there for the Aether Gust to hit. The question is just, is it a key card in the way that Seth decides to sideboard? But we're in game number 1 here. This is Thoughtseize on the stack, and it is Claim the Firstborn and Trail of Crumbs in hand for Steinberg. And right now, Seth is deciding which one of these he'd like to take away. But I'll be honest with you here, Cedric. I'm looking at that board state, and I'd be worried about that.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled about that. I think taking the claim is pretty self-explanatory here for Seth. I think it's, of course, worth it to think the decision through, and so he did take the opportunity to do that, because what is the second Trail what kind of path do we go down if there's a second one of those on the battlefield. But claim the firstborn is scary when you have an Uro in your graveyard and a Hydrate Crisis in your hand that you like to max out on. So on the end step, David just sacrificed a goat token to scry, control the top of his library a little bit, didn't find much of anything. Get that damage in there with the Strider and the cat, sacrifice the cat. You can bring the cat back by sacrificing the food token. When you sacrifice that food token, it's going to trigger Trail, as everybody's seeing right now. Get that mana, pay that mana for the Trail, but he only found a land. So the biggest problem right now here for David is he's going to play another Trail of Crumbs, is that his hand is weak, extremely weak, Marshall.
It is. He's going to have to really find some action off of one of those Trail of Crumbs here coming up shortly, because one of the things that Seth Manfield's deck is quite good at is actually gaining life. You know, the combo of Uro and Hydrate Crisis in the later part of the game, you know, Uro will often hit the battlefield 2, 3, 4 times over the course of a game. You know, we're talking 9, 12 life potentially, and then you can get another few off of the Hydrate Crisis. It can actually make David's, you know, current game plan of just sort of beating down with his mid-range creatures not that viable. That said, he has at least gotten him down to 13 at this point, as we see Seth Manfield go in the tank and think about how he wants to approach these next few turns. It looks like he's going to kick things off with an Uro.
And I think what you're mentioning there with regards to the life total is there's a third copy of Aether Gust. So, again, that's a card that I think Seth wants to draw maybe 1 or 2 copies of in a game and have it be timely. You know, he's not playing against Goblins where drawing multiples is good. This is a different matchup entirely, and a lot of the aggression can be black-based at times. But the point I was going to make that I think you did a really nice job of making is the fact that life gain from Seth's deck means that this kind of aggressive, and I'm using that term a little bit loosely here, start from Steinberg isn't really all that aggressive at all when Uro's being escaped and Hydrate Crisis is being played for a ton of mana. So I'd like to add a little something more to the battlefield here, David, if you can. So that's why, again, you're seeing the aggressive sacrifice of Cauldron's Familiar.
That's right. Here we're going to see Woe Strider once again sacrifice to try to get some action going. Dig for something with Trail of Crumbs. Once again, though, the card went to the bottom off of that scry, so David's just going to be left hoping to rip. And he sort of did. He found a Witch's Oven. Now, he already had a sacrifice outlet in that Woe Strider, but this cannot be Aether Gusted, and he can put it on the battlefield, so sure. Yeah,
there's a lot to like about Witch's Oven here, of course, because when you do sacrifice the cat, you are generating a food token, and we can, of course, see the food token then be sacrificed, trigger the Trail of Crumbs, yada, yada, yada. So Witch's Oven may have been one of the better finds in this situation. Not seeing what he's choosing from here on this decision, but it looks like Fabled Passage is going to be added to the hand, which may have just been the best of the 2 cards he had the option of choosing from, but more importantly, his draw is getting a little bit mana hungry right now because every time you sacrifice a food for Trail of Crumbs, you're going to want to pay 1 mana each time, so that'll be 2. So, you know, ideally having 6, 7, maybe even 8 mana on the battlefield to trigger all those Trail of Crumbs, pay for them, and then, of course, deploy another threat is what David wants to do in the interim.
Curious to see if what Seth wants to do here, if he wants to use an Aether Gust on a Trail of Crumbs. I mean, he just has triple Aether Gust rotting in his hand, no targets in sight. It feels like he's just compelled to do something with his mana and one of these gusts, and that's what he's going to do here.
Yeah, and I like this. It's obviously not anyone's favorite play,
right.
But you're going to see David sacrifice Fabled Passage in response and dig up a basic land. But the big thing here for me is it's just converting a card into the graveyard for Uro. And that's good enough, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, great point, Cedric. That accomplishes multiple goals here, using up Seth's mana. It does mess with David's board at least a little bit, and then he fills up his own graveyard. That's plenty enough to fire off an Aether Gust here, no doubt about it. And look at this, a Mayhem Devil in hand off of the first Trail of Crumbs activation from the second set. I will note here, Cedric, this is becoming a major issue now. Another Mayhem Devil in hand, and we did see this turn 4 activations of Trail of Crumbs. The mana was spent on Trail, and then the Witch's Oven. That's how powerful this deck can be when it comes to getting that engine rolling, and now David's going to have access to double Mayhem Devil. Now, there is a problem here. Seth does know about it, and he's got the Aether Gust to at least deal with some of it.
Yeah, but Aether Gust, as good as that card can be in certain situations for Seth, it is a temporary solution. It is not a permanent one, unless David wants it to be. So as backbreaking as Aether Gust can be at times, it can also just be a minor annoyance where you say, I'm going to put that card right back on top because you have shown me that you have no real way to deal with this Mayhem Devil. And if you take a look at Seth's hand, that actually looks like it is the case. So David, because Seth only has 1 mana available and it's just a black, we might see him go double Mayhem Devil and then who knows what else on this turn. This turn's looking really good for Steinberg.
Yeah, it really is. Unfortunately for Seth Manfield, a couple of things happened there. The land that he drew was a triome, so that entered the battlefield tapped and prevented him from leaving Aethergust available. And he also got another copy of Hydroid Krasis, which is just a little clunky at this point. Now what's happening is Seth has the information, right, that if this Woe Strider gets blocked by Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, that one of these Mayhem Devils or both of these Mayhem Devils will be able to come down and finish off Uro. The question for Seth is he okay with that or not, given that the Woe Strider will also die?
Also, so if we play a land, we play double Mayhem Devil, you sacrifice a cat, that's 2. You generate a food token, you sacrifice a food token, that's 2 more. And then
so that would have Uro dead if blocked.
Well, I'm seeing if we get through with Woe Strider, is it lethal?
Oh, right.
That's what I'm
I always
counting.
forget that part with this deck, and it's always more relevant than I give it credit for until it's right on top of you. You know? Yeah, great point, Cedric. Sometimes this deck can just kill you just like that. And it does look like Seth did the math and said, I do need a block here. That's going to cost a Woe Strider for Steinberg, but an Uro for Seth Manfield, and a point of damage going upstairs as well.
Yeah, kind of into this play. So Mayhem Devil, you're going to get 2 more triggers from sacrificing the food token. Trail trigger will occur, but doesn't have the mana to pay for it. Culture Familiar's back, trigger that, drain and gain. 19 to 11 in favor of Steinberg with a very nice battlefield. And Aethergust, again, is a temporary answer to this problem.
Very awkward here for Manfield. He has options on just getting rid of the Mayhem Devils temporarily with Aethergust. But if he goes for Hydroid Krasis, he can do it for 4. The problem is that lines up exactly how you don't want it to against Mayhem Devil ×2. But he can play a Hinterland Harbor and do it for 5, but then he won't have access to any more mana for the turn, and so it would just be the 5/5 Krasis sitting out there, and that's a lot of hope to pin on the 1/5/5 there.
Yeah,
so let's see what he does.
Sestral just really hasn't. I mean, it's not like Sestral is bad, really. I mean, this is a game where you played Uro, you played Thoughtseize. You know, he drew a couple too many copies of Gust. You could argue again because it's a temporary solution, not a permanent one. But it's not Seth's best draw. I think it's far from it, but I don't think it's Seth's worst draw either. There's a Thoughtseize, and he's not going to see. He's not going to like what he sees if he casts it. Excuse me.
Yeah, you see him look at the Aethergust. As he has left that up, he decided to split the difference and go for the Krasis for 3. That guarantees that he can cast an Aethergust, and it also means that multiple triggers beyond just one Mayhem Devil activation will need to go, or one double Mayhem Devil activation will need to go on that Krasis to actually kill it. So this is a draw step Aethergust here, or it looks like from Seth. And that's going to force some action from Steinberg to make sure that he's getting these triggers in. And not good news for Seth Manfield. These triggers are going right upstairs. Seth drops down to 10 life here. And that makes me think that Steinberg feels like he's got the win here.
Well, you know how I feel about face being the place. So
you love that. I know once you saw those triggers go upstairs, you're like, oh, yeah, that's the one.
I'm on board with this, baby.
Yeah, I should have done it last turn, too. Leave that Uro alone.
Well, I'll fight you. I hate Uro, so you know what?
Oh, yeah, right.
Blowtorch that thing to the graveyard, please.
Yeah, anything that gains you 3 life repeatedly, Cedric is not going to be
on
board with.
That's an aggro player's nightmare. Get that thing out of here.
Yeah.
Hydroid Krasis, whatever. You already got your cards. I don't care about that thing anymore. But Uro, you got to get off the battlefield at all costs.
David Steinberg deep in the tank now after throwing those initial triggers to Seth. He's at 10 life. And he's going to go ahead and put that Mayhem Devil on top of the library. That was inside of the draw step there for Steinberg. So it's going to sit there until next turn, assuming that next turn happens. But it's starting to feel like Steinberg, if he can't finish off Seth this turn, will have a trivial time of doing so next turn.
And I think he can finish him off this turn because what you saw Steinberg do is he sacrificed the food token, trigger the Trail of Crumbs, pay the mana, immediately wants Mayhem Devil back. So you mentioned how it was inside the draw step after Steinberg drew. He put the card on top with Aethergust. So now, again, the Mayhem Devil is back into his hand. He can redeploy the Mayhem Devil right now. He also has a cat and an oven in his hand. So with Seth at 8, I think Steinberg's just doing the math here, but I think this should be good enough to finish things off.
It certainly feels like it. I leave it to the player to do all of the math to figure it out from this point. As you saw, even David, who's been playing this deck for the duration of the tournament, took a good fair bit of time to think things through, because honestly speaking, this is really one of the most difficult decks to pilot that I've seen in quite a while doing coverage. I was having a conversation yesterday, Cedric, and I was thinking out loud, imagine trying to cover this in paper.
I'll pass.
Right? Look at all the triggers that go on constantly. Very, very difficult to keep up with the deck, even from a third-party standpoint here, even on Arena. And as we can see, really, he has put the screws now to Seth Manfield. Seth, with so few options to actually get the job done here, he can run out a big Hydroid Crisis and try to buffer his life total. But David Steinberg has the world at his hands if he gets to untap from here.
Yeah,
it wasn't a 2/2 Crisis.
It wasn't lethal last turn as we did see, but it's more or less lethal, right? Because Seth has to cast a baby Crisis to maybe hit an Extinction event, play that land class Extinction event, and even if that were to be the case, Oven plus Cat is going to take care of the rest of the game. We know he's got another Cat in his hand, multiple Ovens on the battlefield, and that's that. So Seth Manfield down a game and looking for answers in that sideboard, Marshall.
Yeah, incredible. We did see, by the way, he's already trimmed one copy of Aether Gust, as you predicted. We'll see if he even goes for another one or two out of that. Aether Gust, much better at protecting a lead or unlocking a very key turn. In this deck, that comes down most of the time to Nissa Who Shakes the World, where you play Nissa and you have just enough mana for an Aether Gust to make sure that she doesn't die and you don't die. And then if you get to untap, you get the mana advantage from having Nissa on the battlefield. And all of a sudden, you can do stuff that's way, way more powerful than what your opponents are capable of. But when behind, as we saw, those Aether Gusts weren't quite up to snuff to keep Seth alive. Even having gusted on David Steinberg's draw step, he just got it back that turn with Trail of Crumbs and used it to kill Seth, effectively kill Seth that turn. I mean, that's how powerful the deck that, and by the way, there's Aether Gust number 2 going away for Seth.
Yeah, the thing about Aether Gust, and you broke it down pretty beautifully there, is that when you're ahead and you're pushing an advantage and snowballing, it's fantastic. When you're behind, it doesn't do a great job of catching you up in a lot of instances. There are some times, yes, where it can catch you up, and more often than not, the game's going to look like that when you draw those multiple copies of Aether Gust, where it just was less than ideal, and Seth would have rather have had a card like Eliminate, or something that was actually a hard removal spell, which he was unable to find. So those Gusts, he's moved away from them a little bit. Again, didn't move away from them entirely, which I had a feeling he would do, and now we're ready here for game number 2.
Interesting opening hand here for Manfield. He's leaning on these 2 copies of Thoughtseize on the play that will allow him potentially to disrupt David Steinberg's primary game plan. But then he doesn't have a whole lot. Nissa Who Shakes the World into Hydroid Crisis is fantastic, but that's not going to come for quite a few turns after, so he is going to need to draw some stuff in between. He's going to Thoughtseize and see Gilded Goose, a Thoughtseize of David's own, and the big boy, Corvold, Fey-Cursed King. I wonder, this is already a tough decision. It feels like he needs to take Corvold, because otherwise he could have his Thoughtseized, and leaving David with Corvold could be a disaster down the line. Now, if Seth feels like he has enough answers for Corvold and he has a good chance to find them in between, then fair enough. It is going to be a long time before Corvold actually hits the battlefield.
Well, it looks like he's going to go with the Thoughtseize. Now, Gilded Goose is going to show up. Steinberg did draw a land. And Seth's deck does do a decent enough job of containing Corvold, I think, especially after sideboard. So, as powerful as Corvold is, it's headed to the graveyard now anyway from that second Thoughtseize. I don't think it's a card that Seth is, I guess I would say, that scared of. Obviously, it could be a game winner, but at this stage of the game, not the scariest card. Now, as we work ourselves in the mid-game, Seth might be fearful of that being a top deck there for Steinberg, and so that narrative would change some.
Right. And of course, to correct my line there, he should take the Thoughtseize so that he can get both of them and not let Steinberg mess with his hand. But the key here is that he did get the big end game play in the yard. And as you can see, only lands left over for Steinberg at this point. So now it's up to Seth. Does he find something in the middle part of the game to kind of propel him? And so far, no. His next stop is a Crisis for 2 or a Nissa, depending on how he wants to play things.
Yeah, not a ton going on here for Seth, but fortunately for him, not a ton going on here for Steinberg. Gilded Goose is just going to make a food token. And one of the things that Steinberg did, and that's actually a pretty big draw there in that Thoughtseize, but one of the things that Steinberg did in his deck construction, remember, is he got away from Collected Company. So this would be one of those times where drawing Collected Company wouldn't be so bad. Get a couple of threats on the battlefield, start to maybe cozy up that way. But instead, it's just a Thoughtseize taking care of a Nissa. not that scared of a Krasis, and we'll see what Seth's able to draw after he sacrifices this Fabled Passage.
That's right. Most likely if Seth draws another land, we'll see him just play the Krasis. He draws Eliminate. How big of a deal is this Gilded Goose producing food tokens? It's already kind of done its thing, but I could see him making a decision either way here. Let's see what Seth decides to do. Always interesting to watch the highest level players maneuver through positions like this. As you see Seth now going through the options, he can use up all of his mana and get a Krasis down, get a card back off of it, and try to find something to really impact the board down the line. Or he can be a little less mana efficient and cut off the Gilded Goose, which is creating a bunch of food and also is a mana boost for Steinberg. Let's say he draws another Corvold, he could just cast it, that kind of thing.
Looks like we're going to hold off a little bit right now. Here's Eliminate. Wow, Eliminate on a lowly Goose.
Poor Goose.
Right?
And it left behind a legacy, though, of 3 food token. And David Steinberg draws, well, the best card in the deck. There's Mayhem Devil right off the top of the library. He doesn't have anything incredible to do with it at this point. Sacrificing food for life just to get an extra ping isn't really the name of the game, but that is certainly going to be a big threat that Seth Manfield has to deal with. Interestingly, he's going to wait an extra turn here and play a Fabled Passage, crack it, and then he'll be able to play a Krasis for 4 next turn.
Now, far be it from me to question Seth Manfield and his decision-making, given his pedigree in Magic, but I will say I was a little bit surprised at that Eliminate on the Gilded Goose, because the Gilded Goose didn't feel like it was doing all that much. Now, obviously, he uses the Eliminate on the Goose when Steinberg's not doing anything, and then naturally Steinberg draws Mayhem Devil, which is punishing that decision in a very meaningful way. But I was surprised even if he didn't draw the Mayhem Devil, because while the Gilded Goose was making food tokens, it didn't seem all that threatening. But Seth thought otherwise, and well, he's drawn a couple of spot removal spells right now, so he's still doing just fine.
Yeah, he plays the Hydroid Krasis here as a 4/4, and he draws a pair of Eliminates. And boy, that's fantastic. Having an answer for the Mayhem Devil is going to be great, because as close as David Steinberg is to setting up the real nonsense that his deck can do, he is missing a piece right now. He does not have a sacrifice outlet. The Cauldron Familiar, 3 food, and a Mayhem Devil, but the Familiar can't get in the graveyard. He doesn't have any way to put it in there, and I don't think Seth's going to help him along that lines either. And but I got to say, if Steinberg does find a way to get that rolling, it is going to get ugly very quickly. So Seth is going to be very happy that he found those copies of Eliminate. And look at this, land go from Steinberg, and that is a big sign for Seth Manfield. You can almost sense the relief from his side there as he gets to fire off this Eliminate, and somehow that Mayhem Devil just did 1 ping, and it was from Seth's own card. That was it. And now this Hydroid Krasis gets to start battling. Remember when we were talking about Aether Gust being better when you're ahead, Cedric? Well, check it out. We made it.
Yeah, this is one of those spots where Aether Gust is going to be better ahead, assuming that Steinberg's able to draw a green or red spell for Aether Gust to target. Cauldron Familiar is going to mosey on in here real quick. Now, Will Strider, that's a black spell. That's one that can be targeted by Eliminate, taken care of by that removal spell. But that also gives Steinberg the ability to sacrifice a Goat or a Cauldron Familiar and get some real control over his draw step, because he does not have that right now.
Yeah, I feel like that was actually a very good draw. Yes, Eliminate's going to target it, but we're going to see this cat dance back and forth between the graveyard and the battlefield multiple times, and that scry could be really important as you see him scry a card to the bottom here before bringing the cat back for the first time. This is all going to happen with Eliminate on the stack, but it's another one of the powerful things about David Steinberg's build, and really all of the Jund Sacrifice builds, is that they can do a lot at instant speed when it comes to having a card like Woe Strider out there.
Also worth noting, too, depending on how many cards are in Steinberg's graveyard, and we don't have a great look, but I'm going to work under the assumption that he's very close to escaping that Woe Strider. So even if he doesn't find what he's looking for with the scries, and he's put a couple of cards already on the bottom here, Marshall, let's say he bricks off and just draws a land, and it's less than ideal. Well, he should be able to almost certainly escape that Woe Strider, which means that he has effectively found good draw for the turn. So I'll say this, as it looks like he's keeping Oven on top, which makes a lot of sense. Seth needs to draw something proactive on his draw step.
Yep, find that Nissa, get it on the battlefield and get rolling here, because he is going to need to shut the door on this game quickly, or Seth Manfield is going to be out of the tournament. Remember, David Steinberg's up a game here, and any time that you see an oven, is the oven gone?
He put the oven away. I was a little surprised. He thought about keeping it. He decided to put it away and find something else.
I'm surprised by that too. When you have your opponent down to 8, oftentimes the cat oven thing can really get the job done quicker than you'd think. That said, it is a tough sell because this Hydroid Crisis is smashing pretty darn hard. The good news for Steinberg, though, is that Seth is out of gas. Once again, he just has Aether Gust.
Now, that is an enormous draw, because as I was mentioning the fact that Wolfstrider could come back from the graveyard, one thing I overlooked was access to double black mana, because I assumed he had 6 mana on the battlefield, that he had double black. He did not. So he actually needed a second black source that entered the battlefield untapped. So Overgrown Tomb, generally not a great top deck in a situation like this, is exactly what the doctor ordered. Wolfstrider is going to escape from the graveyard, bring that goat along with it. There's still a Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard to be returned via the food token. So that was a nice one.
And look at this. Seth is going to Aether Gust his own Hydroid Crisis back on top of his library. He has all that mana and nothing to spend it on. And yeah, he's like, I didn't find a target for the thing. I'm just going to burn this spell and just slam a huge Crisis. This is a 6/6 flying trample. And look at that. He found Thoughtseize and another Crisis. I don't think there's anything in hand here for Steinberg, so that Thoughtseize isn't going to do much.
The versatility of Aether Gust sometimes goes overlooked. Now, big question you have to ask yourself if you're Steinberg is, do you have, as it looks like he's looking at Mayhem Devil, does he have Claim the Firstborn in his deck after sideboard? Again, Claim in a matchup like this, it's really high ceiling, taking a Crisis or an Uro, but a lot of the time it can be really bad. So,
in this case, game.
Yeah, in this case, it is game over. So I imagine he's probably left some number in. I don't know if he's left the full 4 in or not, but probably some number to draw towards. But it feels like it's hard to say no to a Mayhem Devil here, given the deck that he's playing. And that's why this scry is so difficult. And away it goes.
He said no again. He knows what he needs to find to try to slam the door on this match, puts Mayhem Devil on the bottom of his library. And now he has the choice with the Witch's Oven again. And you can see on his face that this is a tough decision. He's going to bottom that as well. He is just bottoming premium spells left and right here, and going for another scry. I think he's trying to go for the win right now, Cedric, by trying to find Claim the Firstborn.
Okay, Trail of Crumbs is nice because it will bring you a food token, which will allow you to get the cat back and kind of do some of that stuff again. Now, remember, with Trail, it's a permanent that you get to add to your hand.
Correct.
Not
so
a spell.
Find, Claim with it. Well, let's see what he finds here. With all that extra mana, you got to figure that this Trail of Crumbs is going to do good work for him, although in this case it was just a land, which means he's got to pass a turn back, and that's going to open the door wide open for Seth. All of a sudden, things have really fallen apart for Steinberg on that turn, because Seth gets to slam for 6 and then play another huge Hydroid Crisis, buoying his life total and giving him a nice big blocker too.
Yeah, it's actually pretty brutal there for Steinberg, because as you mentioned, Seth has the option to slam here for 6, bring Steinberg down to 5, play another Crisis, and not only does he have a blocker back on defense, but he's also going to gain some life as well, and that will probably put him out of range of Claim being lethal. I can't say that with absolute certainty, though. Right. You can make the argument that Seth is just supposed to play Crisis this turn, not attack with either, set up a brick wall for this following turn, and then you can just say, I'll attack with both, and now you're dead.
Right, exactly. That is the situation that he's looking at. He's going to go for 6. He still has a land drop to give, and he even hit it, though he didn't hit anything relevant to play off of it, it looks like, with only 2 mana available. No hand for Steinberg. The Thoughtseize is dead right now. He can't cast Cry or Uro, and he is going to go ahead and attack, though.
Okay.
Or he's thinking about it at least.
Yeah,
I know he's going over exactly what you said, Cedric, where he's like, do I lose to Claim the Firstborn?
Yep.
Or it's just tough because, the Trail of Crumbs can't find it, as you said. So how is David going to kill you with it? It would be pretty annoying if he top decked it and you had to trade off, but
so what's Seth thinking right now?
It's exactly lethal, right?
What Seth is thinking right now is, if I attack for 6, you go to 5. I have a blocker back on defense. You're drawing a mystery card. So if you sacrifice your cat to scry, then that's one less power we have on the battlefield. I'm at 12. So then if you claim the untapped Hydroid Crisis, you're attacking me for 11. Right. And then you're short. So
you have a cold top deck, just a clean have to draw it.
Correct. If he draws exactly Claim the Firstborn, the game is over. Assuming he doesn't sacrifice the Cauldron Familiar on the end step to be able to enhance his draw step.
He's going to rip it right off the top, and it's another Cauldron Familiar there for David Steinberg, and it looks like Seth Manfield may have dodged this one, and that was about as close as they get. And as you see Seth Manfield sit up straight in his chair, that was relief. He knew that things were very close. David knew what was up as well. He did not sacrifice that Cauldron Familiar, even though that had to be tempting. He ran the numbers and said, nope, I just need to draw it right now. It didn't come together for him, even through all those scries to the bottom. And we're going to get a game 3 between these two players.
Yeah, really nice game there between those two players for sure. You know, one of the things about Magic, and I always try to take this into account, it's very easy, Marshall, to take a look and think of like, what are the best draws and what do my best opening hands look like? And when my deck is, performing at its peak, what does my deck look like then? The other thing you have to ask yourself, though, when you're playing at high-level Magic is, what does my deck look like when it's stumbling and fumbling around? That was far from David Steinberg's best draw. That was far from Seth's best draw. But you have to know how to navigate situations like that where, hey, my deck is it's running on fumes right now. What are my best draws? How do I maximize the top of my deck to get myself out of a sticky situation? Because I don't have, Mayhem Devil and Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven going this game. It's not easy mode this game. This is actually much more difficult. And it was for both players there. So to see them navigate that game where both of them were really kind of running on fumes, so much, in fact, that Seth had to gust his own Hydroid Crisis, that was a lot of fun to watch.
That's right. And it's really interesting to see how the players maneuver given what they understand about how the game's going, right? We saw David Steinberg put fantastic cards on the bottom of his library, right? He put a Mayhem Devil, Witch's Oven on the bottom of his library, digging, because in his mind, those cards were not enough to get the job done against the Hydroid Crisis that he was facing down. I think he felt it would have been too slow for him to do that. And so he was digging, perhaps looking for a Claim the Firstborn to just shut the door on the game right there. He did put himself in a position to have one clean draw to hit it and win. And unfortunately for him, he did not. And that's why we find ourselves in game number 3. Seth Manfield looks at the opening hand, 3 lands, a Gust, a Negate, Eliminate, and a Cry of the Carnarium here for Manfield.
It's pretty reactive. There's nothing really proactive about it, but you do have the ability to kill a couple of different things with Cry and Eliminate, buy some time with Gust. Ideally, your Negate lines up in a certain kind of way, though Negate is a little bit worse on the draw than it is on the play. Might not be able to nab a Witch's Oven or a Trail of Crumbs on the early turns of the game. But I do think, even though this hand is without Burrow and a couple other things, I do think that this hand is worth keeping, and so Seth will be doing exactly that, and that's a pretty good first draw step.
Yeah, that was nice because, boy, you brought up a really important point there, Cedric. Look at this. Trail of Crumbs hitting the battlefield, even though Seth has Negate out of the sideboard here, that's got to be one of the best targets for it. But being on the draw makes that very awkward. And Seth may have to try to set up something where he Ether Gusts it on end step and then negates it on the way back down or something along those lines. Really, really tough.
Well, there's Ether Gust right now on the Trail of Crumbs. Now, the big question is, if you're Steinberg, is how important is this card in this matchup to you? Because I think it's rather important. We saw game number 1 unfold, and it was fantastic there. And we saw game number 2 unfold, where it wasn't. It kind of showed up a little bit late and wasn't really at its best. So it's tough. I mean, he knows the matchup. He knows the configuration of his deck much better than I do. But I mean, that's a high ceiling card. I kind of want to draw it again, and it looks like so does he.
Yeah, he put it back on top of the library. He gets to play a Mayhem Devil here on 3, and things getting very difficult for Seth Manfield. The good news is all of that reactive stuff that he had in his opening hand has found homes. Now he has Heartless Act to kill the Mayhem Devil. He has Thoughtseize if he'd like to play it here. He may feel that he needs to keep up Negate to deal with the Trail of Crumbs and just let the Devil sit for a turn. That, to me, is one of the more interesting things that we get to watch Seth do here. What does he prioritize? He could kill the Devil right now and just be done with it, but then he could be facing down a Trail of Crumbs for the rest of this game, and that could be really difficult. The Negate is his answer for Trail right now, and I'm really curious to see what he does.
Yeah, step 1, of course, is figuring out what card to take with his Thoughtseize. You see him kind of going back and forth, taking a look at his hand, assessing the battlefield, and it looks like ultimately he's going to go with Bolas' Citadel. Now, Steinberg's pretty far away from casting Bolas' Citadel. Phyrexian Tower is going to make it that he's not that far away, but you know what? I don't want to have to deal with that card at all, is basically what Seth said there. So For now, I'm going to take 3 from this Mayhem Devil. If you play Trail of Crumbs, I'll counter it. If you do nothing, I will almost certainly kill your Mayhem Devil, and that's what I think this turn's going to look like here for Manfield. So here's a kitty cat.
Cat gets to resolve. Now the question is, where's David Steinberg at here? Does he want to just run the Trail of Crumbs out there into a potential, say, another Ether Gust, which he saw multiple copies of in the first game, or in this case, a negate out of the sideboard? Can he afford to not do anything this turn is another interesting question, because as you see, it is not obvious to David to just slam the Trail of Crumbs here, but he may feel compelled to do so anyway.
Yeah, to answer your question of can he afford not to do anything this turn, my answer is no, but that's only because I can see Seth's hand. I can see that if he does nothing, his creature's going to die, or Seth is going to cast Growth Spiral and keep moseying on along. So I think he is incentivized to do something, even though he doesn't realize how bad it looks on the other side of the battlefield with regards to Seth's hand. So I think it was smart to cast a Trail of Crumbs, even though it did get countered.
Yeah, and you could tell that he knew that that was a distinct possibility. Now, Seth is looking to be in a really great position here. He gets to kill the Mayhem Devil, hit his land drop, say go, fine. But that Cauldron Familiar is just sitting out there. There's a Phyrexian Tower for Steinberg. If he taps it, which he just did here, oh, and it was a Woe Strider too. Thank goodness for him. He can get that Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard. But Cry of the Carnarium makes things very awkward for Steinberg.
Now, don't forget, Cry of the Carnarium's text is a little bit wonky, and so far
as... It is really, really weird.
if anything dies on the entire turn, it gets exiled. So for a lot of these removals, a lot of these spells that kind of word like this, you would think that, okay, if I sacrifice my Cauldron Familiar, and, you know, if he had a way to sacrifice his Woe Strider, he'd say, okay, those cards are safe in the graveyard. But that's not how Cry works. And I actually learned this the hard way at a Grand Prix earlier this year, which seems like eons ago. But those cards are going to get exiled for good. So Cry of the Carnarium looks incredibly good against this Woe Strider and Cauldron Familiar. It is nice if you're Steinberg that you have the opportunity to control your draw step a little bit here, as he's going to scry a card to the bottom. But this is pretty bad news here for our Jund Sacrifice player.
Boy, he's going to lose his entire board, and he's going to lose 2 creatures that really, really would much prefer to be in the graveyard. Very rough there for Steinberg. And now, is that an untapped land? No, it's not. It's another Fetid Pool, so we will not see Elder Gargaroth. Also, he doesn't have a second green mana at the moment. So I assume we're just going to see Growth Spiral here from Seth, but he even has the backup plan with the Heartless Act as well.
Seth's getting a little tricky. I kind of like this. It would have been obvious just to play the Fetid Pools and pass the turn and have Growth Spiral plus Heartless Act available, but he's going to start, assuming that Steinberg doesn't do anything of relevance to change his play, by just casting Growth Spiral, get his information, and then decide, do I want to put the Fetid Pools in? Depending on what I draw, do I just want to cycle the Fetid Pools and get a little deeper in my deck? There's no guarantee I need that to be my 5th land, because it doesn't actually get me any closer to playing Elder Gargaroth. So a smart play there from Manfield that I really like a lot, actually.
Yeah, a really good play here from Seth. He looks to try to find maybe an Ether Gust or something like that for this Vraska. Unfortunately for him, he finds an Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. He can play the Fetid Pools if he'd like, though I think he's also considering the option of just cycling it.
Yeah.
Given that he needs the green mana anyway, he might just want to get deeper into his library, as the 5th mana really does need to be green here for Gargaroth, or if he finds a Nissa down the line.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would have just played that Fetid Pools and then cast a Growth Spiral and say, I have Growth Spiral plus Heartless Act up, and then I draw another land. I'm able to play an Elder Gargaroth, or I find another green source. Seth did none of those things. Now, he's still without that green source, but he maximizes opportunity of finding that second green source, which is an incredibly smart play. Now here comes Uro. This is further maximization of finding that green source, and now we have found it.
Green source, there it is. Hinterland Harbor hits the battlefield. Seth can also play the island, given that he casts an Uro this turn. He found an Eliminate, but unfortunately, Vraska costs 4 mana and will be out of range.
This Thoughtseize is actually a pretty nice draw. Probably going to see it get fired off. Now, Steinberg did have an answered Elder Gargaroth in hand. You see the Murderous Rider, and the Swift End portion of that card will take care of the giant 6/6 that I lose to consistently on Magic Arena.
Yeah, that's got to be your nightmare.
Yeah, basically every match that they cast it, I lose the game, which is fine. So to see it potentially get Thoughtseized here, no sweat off my back. Good for you, David Steinberg. But he's got to figure out a way to get through Heartless Act and Eliminate right now, and Phyrexian Tower is not a great way to go about doing that.
Currently, Vraska ticking ever upwards here, but not really getting David anyway. Destroyed a food and then a land, but David just found another copy of Phyrexian Tower. And look at this, Hydroid Krasis was the draw step here for Seth Manfield, and that is exactly the type of card that he needs to get rolling. One of his top-end mana sink type cards, and Krasis is perfect.
Yeah, and it's one of the type of cards that Steinberg does not want to see on the other side of the battlefield, because Krasis is going to give you those cards no matter what happens. So Steinberg does swift end this card. That's one less swift end for the Uro that's in the graveyard, but also, whatever, I got my cards, I got my life, so I don't really care if you kill it, and if you don't kill it, it's going to kill you. So this is bad news all the way around here for Steinberg. Things weren't looking up anyway, because he doesn't have very much going on, but this is a rock and hard place here, because whatever you do to this Hydroid Krasis, I genuinely don't think Seth cares.
Right. Exactly. And it's going to be swift end to take it down. Things are starting to get mildly interesting from the Vraska standpoint. With this plus, that could put Vraska up into range of getting towards an ultimate, which you don't often see from Vraska Golgari Queen. The ultimate is you get an emblem that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game.
Now it's really important. It's really important that you said combat damage, and not just any damage.
Oh, good point. Yeah, the Mayhem Devil just throws a little pingy dingy over there, and it's done.
Yeah, here's looking at you, Mayhem Devil. You don't get to do it all by yourself. So
wow, but look at this. Claim the Firstborn in hand for Steinberg. I think he's trying to set up the ultimate next turn and try to kill if Seth ends up with a creature on the battlefield with either the Rider or whatever Seth casts. Now, Heartless Act plus Eliminate is going to keep Seth protected from that, it seems, but it's closer than it looks.
This is, I mean, I can't tell. I've been doing this coverage thing a long time. I have to believe I've seen Vraska Golgari Queen win with its emblem before. I can't remember it as much as I'd like to, but I have to believe I've seen it. But I think we may have just seen Maelstrom Pulse play spoiler.
Maelstrom Pulse could take out all 10 loyalty there for Vraska Golgari Queen and make this whole line of play moot. The interesting part, though, is that it seems as if David went for the ultimate. It's -9, by the way. That Seth actually could just kill the creatures on the battlefield one way or the other and survive. I wonder if Seth just wants to play it safe, though, and get rid of Vraska using the Maelstrom Pulse here.
I want to see the Vraska emblem.
I did too.
Okay, all right. So that breeding pool's gonna. Okay, so that's interesting. Breeding pool entering the battlefield untapped. Okay, so this has got to be Pulse on Vraska then. This makes sense, right? Like it just has to be.
Has to be now, yeah, because you don't have protection from two things anymore.
I boo this man. Boo.
Yeah. Good play, Seth, but things are still very much live here for David Steinberg. The claim the first. Ooh, a little short on mana at the moment. Vraska having eaten up a good chunk of David Steinberg's mana base there, sifting through the library means that Corvold is going to have to stay in hand for now, but still claim the Firstborn.
All right, so if he draws a land, it's perfect. Oh man. So if he draws a land there, he sacrifices the Uro to the tower, and then is able to play Corvold and sacrifice something to the Corvold, put a counter on it, and then Heartless Act can't kill it. So it could have actually just been like perfects if he drew a land. He didn't, but he gave himself the best opportunity to do that.
Great read, Cedric. That situation, as you described it, just kept getting better and better and better for Steinberg as it went. But unfortunately for him, he missed on the land, and that could open up the door for Seth to very much stay in this match as he's down to 13 life and facing down a pretty significant board. Things getting very swingy in the late game for both of our players now. Ooh, a breeding pool, but also a Nissa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cast it, untap a thing. Does Seth have a way to have 2 mana? Yes, the Triome on the left will give black plus a colorless, or in this case, black plus a green, and that could unlock one of these removal spells, which Seth certainly is going to be aware of here.
So interesting spot here. So you play the Nissa, right? You almost certainly target the Triome. I think, Seth, the interesting thing for me is, are we going to play Eliminate now on the Devil while the opponent's tapped out, or are we going to wait?
I would play it now, but looking at that David Steinberg has Corvold in hand, that could be a disaster.
Yeah. And Seth is going to very smartly wait. Because if he had just said, I'm going to eliminate this right now in your main phase, then Corvold comes down, sacrifices something, gets a counter, and then it counteracts Heartless Act. Right. Instead, we're just fully waiting. So now Steinberg, he's going to trigger this Mayhem Devil with the Phyrexian Tower. Curious if Seth is going to make a move here or not. Again, because Seth doesn't know about the Corvold. We do, just like everybody watching at home. And if the Corvold gets a counter on it, when it resolves, like once the Corvold comes in and has a counter on it, it's actually pretty hard for Seth to deal with, especially with the makeup of his hand right now. So I have to imagine he's playing around that in some capacity.
Yeah, and this is getting interesting because Steinberg's going for that Triumph here in the first main phase, and there's Corvold Faker's King going on the stack.
Yeah, and there's no permanent for him to sack right now either, so
no, there's
I'm
not.
a little bit ahead of myself in that regard.
So Seth still will have a window to kill Corvold as it stands. Now, if Steinberg did have any other way at instant speed, it could really mess things up for Manfield. But as you can see, not enough mana for the food token. Wait, can the Gilded Goose just do it?
No, I tricked myself. I was right. When it enters the battlefield, sack a thing, yeah. For some reason, I tricked myself a little. Yeah.
And there's a window, but Steinberg has the ability to sacrifice food to Gilded Goose in response to Heartless Act, and that would put a counter. That means that Corvold is going to be a huge issue here for Manfield.
Yeah, I was analyzing all the ways that this Corvold could actually stay on the battlefield and overanalyze things a little bit. So yeah, you nailed it. With Goose active, you play Corvold. Trigger goes on the stack. If Seth tries to Heartless Act it, you sacrifice the food token, and then the Heartless Act is countered upon resolution. So you are correct. So now Corvold's in. It's going to get the counter, which is the situation we were trying to set up here on commentary. We got there finally. And now Heartless Act, like we were trying to get to, you're not going to do anything.
No, it's really awkward, though, because David actually has to sacrifice one of his lands because he needs the goose and the food both on the battlefield to make it so that Seth can't kill using Heartless Act. And I know we said it at the beginning, super impressed by David Steinberg's play here. He has seen all of the angles and not left himself open to anything this game.
Now, do remember, as you and I talked about at the beginning stages of Game 1, a little bit in Game number 2, there are times where Aether Gust is very good. There are times where it's quite bad. This is one of those times where it being something that delays things is incredible.
Huge. He would love to see that card. Yeah, incredible. Now, there is still the 1 damage on the Triumph there. That ended up just going to waste, as it turned out. But this is massive. Right now, Seth gets to untap with Nissa, who shakes the world. He has Uro. He just drew a Cycling Triumph. So he gets to see some cards here and try to find an answer for Corvold before David Steinberg gets to start slamming and maybe just winning this game.
Yeah, Steinberg needs him to whiff a bunch.
A lot.
Yeah. He needs a whiff on that cycle, which... That's one.
Bingo.
We need a whiff on this Uro. So let's see this one. That's 2.
Okay, 0 for 2 for Seth Manfield here. Can he cast Uro out of the yard? No.
But this Uro can attack.
That's right. So he does get another look here, and it's another spin. It's a growth spiral. Wow, David Steinberg is just waiting to see if he gets to untap with this Corvold. We've seen the type of fireworks that can happen, even with Corvold just all by itself, though. That being said, Steinberg no longer has the Mayhem Devil, doesn't have a cat. You know, so going to have to lean on the oven and the goose and stuff pretty hard here.
Steinberg, yeah, not gonna block, which good. Okay. Enough of the redraws!
What is going on here?
Come on!
Even through all these lands and a Nissa, you will eventually run out of redraws if you keep hitting these spirals.
What's this one?
And another miss. Unbelievable.
So was that 5 cards?
5 cards. That was Draw Step, Triumph, 2 Growth Spiral, and a trigger off of Uro.
No, 2 Uros. That's 6 cards. Remember, because he escaped Uros. 1. Yeah, 2 Uros. Okay, so that was 6 cards, no answer.
Crazy. In fact, just kind of nothing. I mean, you know, we didn't even see like, okay, I'll survive this turn and then I'll cast a huge Krasis next, you know, any of that type of stuff.
Now remember, hasn't used Nissa yet this turn.
Correct.
Not sure if there's enough cards in the graveyard to be able to escape the Uro right now.
Good question. We did just put 2 more growth spirals into the graveyard. Now, I don't think it's going to be a factor here, Cedric, but I will mention that Seth's clock is below 6 minutes. That's plenty of time. This game looks like it's about to come to a head one way or the other, but just something to keep an eye on in case something changes dramatically.
Well, what are you thinking with this Heartless Act? This is interesting.
Yeah, the two modes at this point are Kill Goose or Shrink Corvold.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, shrinking Corvold doesn't make sense, so this is going to be Goose going down, I assume.
All right, well, we sack that to the Witch's Oven, almost assuredly.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So first sack the food to the Goose. That's going to get a Corvold trigger. Then sack the Goose to the Oven.
Oh, that's pretty cute.
Behold,
I get your 2 new cards. Now look, okay, so now we're going to see.
So
this.
there was
okay.
actually enough.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to leave Seth tapped out, as he's only going to be getting 1 card, so it can't be a spell and a land. So he won't be able to do anything about Corvold, but he will be at a hefty 20 life here.
23.
Facing it down. 23 life, excuse me. And that is going to be very difficult. I mean, often I say, you know what? Corvold could do anything, right? But come on, 23 looks like a bit much from this position.
Yeah, and you beat me too, because I was just thinking like, all right, now I've seen some things. I don't know if I've seen Corvold do 23 the turn after enters the battlefield when the person, and in this instance, David Steinberg, was already on pretty reduced resources. So, if you can do 23, you are the man.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Now, one big question comes up. There's 2 things that come to mind. One, can he set himself up to not die next turn and maybe reload the hand and get things going for a win next turn? That's a lot to have to handle here, because if you attack Nissa, you're staring down a heck of a lot of damage here just as it sits. The other thing, though, that comes to mind is the fact that Steinberg does not have that much mana to work with. It really is all about Corvold at this point, and somehow found another land off the top of the battlefield here. Yeah, a second Witch's Oven isn't going to do much. Steinberg has really hit a wall, even with the 9/9 Corvold on the battlefield.
Okay, well, that's a whiff there for Seth. And remember, too, that he escaped that Uro last turn, and he doesn't have very many cards in the graveyard. Going to get to see a new card with this attack. Negate is not an answer to Corvold, but it could end up being a good draw.
Right. It's a possibility that it's good, depending on what we see from Steinberg over the next turn. This is not a lethal attack from Manfield, and he's basically out of gasoline. He's going to get the good news that Steinberg doesn't have anything to do right now, but it does look like Steinberg's going to get one more shot, and it was a forest off the top of the library. My assumption is that even with an attack here at 4 life, having to sacrifice one of the permanents, even any card off the top, isn't going to be good enough for Steinberg. It looks like the run may be ending here, Cedric.
All right, so best draw here for Steinberg, I think.
Okay.
Assuming, okay, so I'm working under the assumption right now, and you have to do this sometimes, that Seth's draw steps are just going to be horrible the rest of the game. Okay, or at least the next one, and plus the Euro one, they're just going to be bricks. I think Cauldron of Familiar is his best draw.
Okay.
Because that can block the Euro. You're at 4. You block, so you go to 5. You play Cauldron of Familiar, you block the Euro. Euro doesn't have trample, thankfully, and then you sacrifice. You pay the life to sacrifice the food token. Or, excuse me, you pay the mana to sacrifice the food token to gain the life. So you go from 5 to 8, and then you take 6. You go to 2, and you're still playing.
And you're still playing Magic, and you just hit for 10 in the air with Corvold.
Yeah, again, we're working on the assumption that Seth is just going to whiff all day long.
Right.
So,
very tough position here for Steinberg. Let's see if he can complete stage 1. I think he's going to sacrifice a Witch's Oven. Nope, he's going to go for a land here. What does he hit?
Oh,
my goodness sakes.
That's
what
brutal.
A rough draw there for David Steinberg. He hits for 10, but he has nothing left to do, facing down a massive army here. from Seth Manfield, who we have to give credit to Seth for maneuvering through a very difficult game beautifully at every step. We expect that from Seth at this point, but still it's worth it to take note about how well he plays these games. As it stands, though, David Steinberg and his amazing run to top 8, and even here in the top 8, looks like it's poised to end.
Yeah, that's brutal. I mean, he had some very, very big draw steps there. And, that turn when we saw Seth draw those 6 cards, 2 Uros, 2 Growth Spirals, Cycle of Triumph, draw step for the turn, and he just went whiff, 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 whiff. You're thinking, okay, you know what? We might have a shot at this thing. We're behind, but we might have a shot, and Corvold's our best chance of catching back up at the top of the deck for Steinberg. It did not cooperate with him. I don't think he's got anything hiding out in the graveyard. If he did, we'd be seeing it. We're looking at a hand of 5 lands, 3 of which Seth knows about. Seth is, you can see him down there in the bottom left. He's a little nervous right now, but I think he'll find out momentarily that he's good to go.
Yeah, this is probably the best thing that David can do is sacrifice the Corvold. It gives him one more look, and it was another Witch's Oven, and he's going to scoop it up. Seth Manfield stays alive here in the lower round 2 match with an absolutely incredible performance by him. And, not to take the glory